Hey everyone, Tin Man here, and let's talk about the Dota Underlords metagame. So here I've got a tier list of some of the most popular strategies in Dota Underlords, and I'm going to do something a little bit different in this meta update. I'm going to be using a lot of statistics that I've gathered from tournaments over the past weekend, and as well as a lot of my information from ranked games on what compositions do best, their win rates, their popularity, and all kinds of interesting stats that I think can really help prove the point of why these tiers are the way they are. And they can give us some good insight into what builds are strong and when and why. Before we get into the numbers though, let's talk about some of the terminology I'm going to be using. Popularity, it's simply the percentage of players who use a particular build. The average placement is the average final placement of the build, and the lower number here is better. That indicates that it's closer to the first and second place finishes rather than the 7th and 8th place finishes. The percentage of games won, that is quite simply out of every game that was played, how many did this build win? So this is really an indication of what is winning on a game-to-game basis. And the chance of top 3, that'll be the percentage of the players who use the build who end up finishing in the top 3 of their respective lobbies. So a build could have a very high percentage of games won, but maybe not a very good chance of top 3 if it's very, very popular, and then a lot of people also get, say, 6th, 7th, and 8th place with it as well. With that in mind, let's take a look at S tier. These are the two builds that are just really dominant in the metagame right now. They occupy a very high percentage of the popularity as well as the win rate in terms of actually winning every game. Warriors builds and 6 Mages builds are definitely the king of the hill here. So let's talk about them one at a time. First off, the 6 Warriors variant. Here we see it's the most popular build overall. It's built with a core of 6 Warriors, and there are many Warriors in the game, which allows for a very smooth transition from early win streaks with 1 and 2 cost Warriors like Tiny and Sarter to a very dominant late game with many 4 and 5 cost Warriors such as Doom, Kunkka, Tidehunter, and Troll Warlord. They're often paired with Warlocks, since the healing synergizes with the extra armor from Warriors, but occasionally you see Hunters, although it has a little bit less success than with Warlocks. The stats here are for all variants of 6 Warrior builds, but there are 2 in particular that I think are worth discussing further. So the 6 Warriors, 2 Warlocks, and Arc Warden builds. So this is the most popular subset of these 6 Warrior builds. Uses the 2 Warlocks, typically Necrophos, along with either Alchemist or Witch Doctor, depending on whether or not you found a Troll Warlord. And it has a very high average placement, and the top 3 chance of top 3 is slightly higher than 6 Warriors on a whole. Despite representing about 45% of all the 6 Warrior builds, it accounts for only about 27 of the first place finishes, or the percentage of games won of all the 6 Warrior builds. This means that it's a lot better at getting 2nd and 3rd places rather than wins. This build really peaks at level 9 and focuses on getting all of the units up to 2-star. It very rarely pushes for any 3-star units. Oftentimes players will even level up to 9 by round 21 to really maximize the chance of getting 4 cost units in this build. But you really do want to just stick with 6 Warriors, 2 Warlocks, and then Arc Warden as your big damage dealer to create a 9-unit composition. The other major subset I want to talk about is 6 Warriors and 4 Warlocks. This is a much less popular subset of 6 Warriors, as you can see by the popularity, but it is far more successful when it has all 4 Warlocks, particularly Disruptor and Witch Doctor, in addition to Necrophos and Alchemist. This build wins 21.1% of all games total, yet it accounts for only 4.1% of all builds. That's a really insanely high amount, and it also has a very high average placement and chance of top 3. But before we overreact to this, these numbers do need to be considered carefully. A 6 Warrior and 4 Warlock build requires 10 units to fully function, and if you're going to get to level 10, you're probably already close to top 3 at that point anyway. The main conclusion we can draw from this 6 Warriors discussion is that 6 Warriors, 2 Warlocks, and Arc Warden is a better composition in the mid to late game. In order to actually win the game though, once you get into the top 3, it's often better to swap out the Arc Warden and put in more Warlocks like the Disruptor, and then rely on Troll Warlord to deal the bulk of your damage as opposed to Arc Warden. The next composition in S tier is 6 Mages, and this is a build that has a little bit lower popularity than some of the other builds we'll discuss a little bit later, but it has the second most percentage of games won. The 6 Mages build is just very good at actually winning games. This build will typically consist of 6 mages, and then you'll either exclude Ogre Magi or Razor, as they're the weakest 2 mages, and you'll pair them up with some other magic damage dealers. Some of them are pictured here: Nature's Prophet, Morphling, Dragon Knight, Shadow Fiend, but also Gyrocopter, Viper, Queen of Pain are some other options as well. The build will also typically get to level 9 relatively quickly in order to maximize the odds of finding the Ace of Mages in Lich, who's the most important mage to really transition into a 6 mage build. Moving on to A tier, we'll see that these builds are definitely viable builds. They're a little bit harder to kind of force every single game and have consistent success with, but if the conditions are right, if you say have a good start with any of these builds, you can absolutely ride these to victory. There's nothing holding these back in terms of power level, just maybe a little bit in terms of consistency. So the first up is 6 Knights. We see this is actually the second most popular build behind 6 Warriors. And it's both popularity and percentage of games won are about equal. The average placement is actually a little bit below 4th place, which is really pretty poor for how popular it is. This build will typically use all 6 Knights, along with Necrophos and Witch Doctor at level 8. This allows you to reroll a lot more than other players who are wanting to level up to level 9, because you really do want to reroll a lot with this build because you need a lot of 3-star Knights, particularly Luna and Chaos Knight. They are so very important to get up to 3-star into the late game, otherwise you just simply won't have enough damage to punch through some of those Warriors, some of those Warlocks who are healing a whole lot, or to burst mages down before they get a couple rounds of spells off. Next build is Scrappy Mages here. They're a little bit less popular than the 6 Mages version, but they still have an outsized win rate compared to their popularity. You see that they win 13.2% of the games compared to a popularity of only 9.5%. This is actually kind of weird because they have a fairly low chance of getting top 3 and a below average placement compared to some of our builds we've talked about before. It's very common to see victories from Scrappy Mages, but it's also pretty common to see bottom 3 placement, so it's a very inconsistent build. The Scrappy Mages build will typically run 4 Scrappies and 3 Mages rather than go up to 6. There's simply not enough spots in the build to do that. And they're heavily dependent on getting Techies for his Ace of Adventure's Chain Reaction effect, which all deals magic damage and is then amplified by the mages. This does create a little bit of a weird tension though with this build, where you want to reroll a whole lot on levels 7 and 8 in order to get 3 stars on your Scrappies like Timbersaw, Clockwork, or Tinker. But you also want to level up to 9 in order to increase the chances of finding Techies, Lich, Keeper of the Light, and your other late game units. So balancing this tension really makes it a very difficult build to play properly, and might be the reason why we see such a disparity in high win rate, but also a reasonable chance of getting lower average placements. The next build, and rounding out tier, the A tier, is a 3 Warriors, 3 Hunters, 3 Stars kind of build. And this build, it has a very strong average placement at 3.26 and an amazing 57.9 chance of top 3. And those are second only to the 6 Warriors and 4 Warlock builds, which is inherently biased, as we just discussed before, since if you're going to get that build, you're already close to top 3. But this build is still extremely strong stats-wise. It does win slightly less than we would expect based on its popularity, so that kind of indicates that it's a little bit weaker in the very late game compared to some other builds who are maybe better at closing out the game, even if this build is a little better at getting you to the late game. This build is called a 3-star build because more so than any other build, it really relies on getting almost every single unit up to 3 stars. Typically, you're not even going to spend gold to level up until about round 25, which is insanely late. You're going to be level 5 until you naturally hit level 6 on round 17, and you're going to want to reroll a whole lot so that you can get these units, Axe, Pudge, Slarter, Beastmaster, Drow, and Windranger, all up to 3-star, or at the very least 4 or 5 of them up to 3-star. This can be very risky though, because if other players are competing for the same units, it'll be very difficult to find them all to 3-star, and you might just fall behind, wasting gold on rerolls, and you won't get a whole lot done. But if you do hit them, it can be very, very dominant and just snowball out of control with the Brawny buff. Going into B tier, these compositions can win games, but they show up very infrequently, and they're reliant on a couple key parts. They rely on individual units and good items and just generally having a really good game in order to get those wins. Not that they can't win, it's just rare to see them do well, and they just have a little bit worse stats overall. They're still viable, and you should still understand them. They're both kind of assassin-based builds, and I think that kind of speaks to the inherent volatility of assassins in the meta right now. First, let's talk about Elusive Assassins. And they're not very popular, and they do win the game even less than their popularity would suggest. They have a pretty strong average placement, though, and a pretty decent top 3 percentage, indicating that perhaps they're a little bit underplayed at tournaments and at the highest ranks. This build revolves around Assassins and Slark in particular, who you really want to get up to 3-star, and you also really want to get a Mask of Madness on him. It's simply the best pairing of a unit and item between any unit and any item in the game. Slark and Mask of Madness is a match made in heaven. Before that comes online, though, this build can use the very strong early game of Druids, like Nature's Prophet, Treant, Enchantress, and then the strong mid game of Demon Hunters if you have Anti-Mage and Terrorblade. If you cannot manage to get Slark online, you can even use a 3-star Phantom Assassin or Terrorblade to carry your late game as well. The other build here in B tier is the straight up 6 Assassins build. Once again, they're still played on occasion. Their popularity and win rate is pretty low. They have a very low average placement and a very low chance of top 3, but they will show up from time to time. Once again, in order for this build to be viable, you really want as many 3-star units as possible, particularly Slark and Phantom Assassin. If other players are going to be contesting Assassins, you probably don't want to go this route and you want to move on. The build can be very potent against particular Warriors and Warlock builds, as we discussed before, because those builds really rely on long, drawn-out fights where their healing is going to make the difference, but the Assassin Alliance, of course, prevents healing. So if you have 6 Assassins, you can just completely shut off that Warlock healing, and most of those builds don't have too much burst damage, meaning that they're going to really struggle with Slark or Phantom Assassin if they have a Mask of Madness to sustain their life total. So that wraps up the main builds of the meta right now. There are several other builds that do show up in kind of lower tiers in B and even down in C tier, but generally they're going to be worse than the ones we've discussed today. Thank you so much for watching. Please do like and subscribe, turn on notifications if you enjoyed this content so you can catch all of my videos as soon as they come out. You can also follow me over at Twitch TV/TinMan354. I stream there a couple times a week, generally in afternoons and evenings in Eastern US time. And once again, thank you so much to all of my Patreon supporters. I will make all of my data set that I collect to run all these statistics, that information is available to my Patreon supporters, and so you can support me there at patreon.com/tinman354. Link is down in the description below for all of this. Also, make sure to check out QIHL, the website where all of these tier list images came from, and there will also be an article discussing a lot of the same stuff that we discussed today. Should be coming up in the next day or two. It probably won't be published by the time this video goes live, but make sure you check out QIHL for all kinds of guides, tier lists, and all kinds of other great stuff. A lot of it there is written by me, so I'm sure if you enjoy this stuff, you'll probably enjoy what's over on that website. Thank you so much for watching once again, and I will see you next time.